Some of us built this company, Marcus. A pause. 300 people. Nobody breathing. You just mop up after the people who did. Silence. Then a chair scrapes back. A woman in a gray blazer stands up near the front row, folder in hand. Mr. Pruitt, before you continue, there's something the board needs to hear. Marcus doesn't move. Doesn't raise his voice. Just sets a coffee mug down on the folding table in front of him, slow, careful, like it matters more than anything else in the room. Go ahead, Elaine. Cut to black. 6 months earlier. Dunmore Falls, Ohio doesn't wake up so much as it grinds into gear. Frost on the windshields. Steam rising off the Hallbrook Systems parking lot before 6 in the morning. A town built on the same rhythm for 40 years. Factory whistle. Coffee, shift change, repeat. Marcus Reed is already awake before any of that starts. 46 years old. Broad shoulders going soft at the edges the way they do for a man who spent 20 years standing on concrete floors. Left leg ends just below the knee, has since a deployment most people at Hallbrook don't know about, don't ask about, wouldn't recognize the name of the country if they heard it. The prosthetic does most of the work most days. On the bad days, there's a cane, a plain wooden one, nothing fancy, leaning by the back door like a coat rack nobody thinks twice about. 6:15 in the morning. Kitchen light on. Coffee going. There's a mug already sitting by the pot, chipped along the rim, faded lettering that says "World's Okayest Fisherman." It's not the newest mug in the cabinet. Isn't the nicest one either. But it's the one that gets used every single morning without fail. Down the hall, a door creaks open. 19 years old. Backpack already half-packed. Hair still doing whatever hair does before 8 a.m. Naomi Reed. Not Marcus's daughter. Not by blood niece. Technically, though nobody in the house has used that word out loud in about 6 years. She grabs a granola bar off the counter without breaking stride. You're going to be late again. I'm never late. You were late Tuesday. Tuesday doesn't count. Tuesday there was a raccoon situation. Naomi doesn't argue that one. There genuinely was a raccoon situation. She's a sophomore now, first year done, home for the summer before heading back to finish an engineering degree 2 states over. The kind of kid who takes a busted charging cable apart just to see why it stopped working, then can't figure out how to put it back together, then blames the manufacturer. Marcus taught her that habit without meaning to, or maybe with meaning to hard to say which, this many years out. The car ride to the community college where she's taking a summer course doesn't take long. 10 minutes, maybe 12 with the light on Route 9. Not much gets said. A few words about the raccoon. A question about whether the Bengals have any shot this year. Answered honestly. No. Then Naomi's out the door, backpack over one shoulder, and Marcus is alone again, driving toward Hallbrook Systems the long way. The way that avoids the pothole by the old grain elevator. Hallbrook Systems sits on the edge of town in a building that used to make something else entirely. Nobody quite remembers what, not anymore, just that the brick is old and the additions built onto the sides are newer, cheaper, less patient with the wear of time. Inside, it's a different world. Automated conveyor lines. Robotic sorting arms. Control panels blinking green and amber in rows that stretch the length of a football field. 900 people work here, give or take, across 3 shifts. Marcus works nights. Night maintenance supervisor, the title on the badge, the title on the paycheck, the title everybody at Hallbrook uses when they think of him at all, which isn't often. The job is simple to describe and hard to do well. Something breaks at 2 in the morning, Marcus fixes it. A sensor on line 4 starts misreading. A conveyor belt jams on a Tuesday shift change. The automation software throws an error nobody in the daytime crew wants to deal with before their coffee kicks in. Marcus knows every inch of that system, knows it the way a person knows the sound of their own house settling at night, without having to think about why. Executives walk past him in the hallway sometimes. Don't nod. Don't not nod. Either just walk past the way people walk past a fire extinguisher mounted on a wall. Useful. Unremarkable. There when needed. Nobody at Hallbrook connects the dots on why a night maintenance supervisor understands the automation architecture better than half the engineering department. Nobody thinks to ask. There's no reason to ask. A resume is a resume. A badge is a badge. The truth sits quietly underneath all of it, filed away in paperwork nobody at Hallbrook ever has cause to read. 10 years before any of this, Two brothers built something in a garage that wasn't much bigger than the one Marcus still uses today. Dennis Reed was the older one, the talker, the dreamer, the one who could walk into a room of investors and make them believe in something that didn't exist yet. Marcus was the one who made it exist. Circuit boards, control logic, the actual guts of what would become the automation system that runs Hallbrook's entire operation today. Dennis sold the vision. Marcus built the thing the vision was about. When the patents got filed, they didn't get filed under Hallbrook systems. That decision came from a lawyer neither brother particularly liked, but both trusted advice that sounded boring at the time and turned out to matter more than either of them understood. The patents went into a separate holding company instead, something small, something with a name that sounded like every other paperwork shuffle outfit in Ohio. Reedline Holdings. Reedline licensed the technology to Hallbrook. Hallbrook paid royalties. Reedline, in exchange, held a controlling stake in the company built on top of its own invention. Standard stuff, according to the lawyer. The kind of structure companies use all the time to keep the people who build something separate from the people who run something. Nobody in that meeting thought it was interesting enough to remember for long. Dennis became the face of Hallbrook. Marcus stayed in the background, which suited him fine, never much cared for being looked at, never much cared for boardrooms, and there was a leg to think about, recovery, a life to rebuild after the deployment that took part of it. Dennis handled the spotlight. Marcus handled the wiring. For years, that arrangement worked exactly the way it was supposed to. Then, 6 years ago, on a stretch of wet highway outside Columbus, a truck crossed the center line. Dennis Reed didn't make it home that night. There isn't a clean way to describe what that did to Marcus, and there isn't much point trying. Grief doesn't organize itself into neat sentences. What can be said plainly is this. Within a year, Marcus had handed day-to-day control of Hallbrook Systems over to a hired CEO, stepped back from every public-facing piece of the company, and taken custody of a 13-year-old girl who'd just lost her father. Reedline Holdings didn't go away. Couldn't go away. The patents were still real, the royalties still came in, the majority stake still existed on paper whether anyone paid attention to it or not. But Marcus, as the last Reed standing at that company, made a decision that felt small at the time and turned out to be the whole shape of the next 6 years. He let a lawyer handle Reedline's side of things going forward. Someone steady, someone who could sit in a boardroom and vote a stake without needing Marcus anywhere near the room. Her name was Elaine Kowalczyk, corporate attorney, careful with paperwork, careful with everything. She signed where she needed to sign, showed up where she needed to show up, and kept the arrangement exactly as private as Marcus wanted it kept, not hidden, not a secret in the dramatic sense, just quiet, unremarkable, filed away. There was no dividend check with Marcus Reed's name on it landing in a mailbox every quarter. That money went somewhere else, into a trust set up for a teenager who didn't know it existed yet, meant for a tuition bill that would come due one day. There was no salary tied to Reedline that anyone at Hallbrook's finance department needed to reconcile against a maintenance supervisor's paycheck because there wasn't one to reconcile. Two entirely separate financial lives, running on two entirely separate tracks, never once needing to cross. And a man can go to work under his own name every single night for 6 years in a building he helped build from nothing, and nobody thinks to ask why the guy fixing the conveyor belt sensors knows so much about how the whole system was designed in the first place. It wasn't a disguise. Marcus never told a lie to get that job. Filled out an application like anybody else. Answered every question honestly. It's just that nobody at Hallbrook ever had a reason to put two names in the same sentence, the maintenance supervisor and the man who invented what he was fixing, because nothing about the paperwork ever asked them to. Sunday nights belonged to the garage. Didn't matter what happened during the week, a rough shift, a bad flare-up in the leg, a fight with Naomi about curfew that neither one really won. Sunday night, the garage door went up, the space heater kicked on if it was cold enough, and Marcus sat down at a workbench cluttered with old transistor radios pulled from yard sales and estate auctions and the occasional curbside pile. Most of them didn't work. That was the whole point. A dial that wouldn't turn. A speaker gone silent. A frequency that used to catch a station and now caught nothing but static, or worse, nothing at all. Marcus would take the back panel off, set the screws in a little dish so they wouldn't roll away, and just look at the guts of the thing for a while before doing anything else. The coffee was always the same. Black, No sugar in that same chipped mug, world's okayest fisherman. A joke gift Dennis had picked up at some gas station on a fishing trip years back, the kind of thing that was supposed to get thrown out eventually and never did. There were nicer mugs in the cupboard. There was no version of Sunday night that used them. Naomi wandered in sometimes, homework forgotten, and asked what he was fixing this week. Sometimes she helped. Mostly she just sat on the stool by the workbench and talked about school, about nothing, about a boy in her chemistry class who definitely wasn't worth the amount of talking she was doing about him. Marcus listened more than he worked, most Sunday nights. The radios could wait. There was a whole other side to Marcus that had nothing to do with wiring or grief or any of it. A fantasy football league, 10 years running, with 3 guys from the old unit, a group chat that got more aggressive every September than it had any right to be, full of trash talk about a trade from 2019 that apparently would never, ever be forgiven. A birthday tradition, every single year, where Marcus got up at a bar with terrible acoustics and sang Piano Man badly enough that people covered their ears and laughed anyway, because it was tradition and because Marcus never once seemed embarrassed about it. Life, in other words, an ordinary one, mostly. A man raising a niece who felt like a daughter, fixing what was broken on the weekends, working a job nobody paid much attention to, carrying a piece of paperwork nobody had cause to ask about. That was how it went for 6 years. Quiet, steady, unremarkable, on purpose. Then, on a Friday in early spring, an email went out to every employee at Holbrook Systems announcing a mandatory all-staff town hall the following week, something about addressing rumors and the future of the company. Marcus read it standing in the kitchen, coffee halfway to his mouth, and didn't think much of it at first. He should have. The town hall got scheduled for a Thursday, 10 in the morning, in the big open floor of Building C, the one with the high ceilings and the flags along the back wall, the one Holbrook only used for things that mattered. Folding chairs, 300 of them, set up in rows facing a small stage that usually held nothing more than a podium and a projector screen. Marcus almost didn't go. Night shift didn't technically require attendance at a 10 a.m. anything. But the email had said mandatory, all staff, no exceptions, and Marcus had never been the kind of man who tested exceptions just to see if they'd hold. So he showed up on 4 hours of sleep, in his gray maintenance polo with Holbrook Systems stitched over the breast pocket, cane in hand because the leg had been talking to him all week, and found a seat near the back. Naomi was there too, which was its own small coincidence. Her summer engineering course had a field visit component, and somebody in the department had arranged for a group of students to sit in on a real corporate town hall as some kind of educational exercise. She spotted Marcus from across the room, gave a little wave, settled in with her classmates a few rows up and to the left. Elaine Kowalczyk was there. She usually was, for anything involving Rideline's interests, though nobody in that room besides Marcus knew to read her presence that way. Gray blazer, leather folder under one arm. She took a seat near the front, close enough to the stage to be useful, far enough back to not be mistaken for part of the presentation. There was a woman near the third row Marcus didn't recognize, younger, notebook out already, the kind of alert posture that belonged to somebody whose job was to write down what happened in a room, not just sit in it. A journalist, it would turn out. Local business desk. Invited special for this one, because Holbrook wanted a growth story told, and growth stories needed an audience beyond the walls. Gregory Ashford Pruitt walked out onto that little stage at 10:04. For minutes late, the way men in his position are always a few minutes late, not enough to be rude, just enough to remind a room who's worth waiting for. Pruitt had been CEO of Holbrook Systems for 6 years. Brought in by Marcus and Dennis Reed back when the company needed someone who could run day-to-day operations while two brothers focused on the technology itself, someone sharp, someone hungry, someone who wasn't an owner and didn't need to be, because the job on offer was big enough on its own. Pruitt had done that job well, by most measures. Revenue up, headcount up. Holbrook's name meant something in the automation industry now that it hadn't meant a decade ago, and a fair share of that could be laid at Pruitt's feet. Credit where it was due. But 6 years is a long time to run something you don't own. 6 years is a long time to sit in rooms with lawyers and accountants who mention, almost in passing, that Reedline Holdings still carries majority equity in entity Pruitt had never once had a conversation with directly, represented always by the same steady woman in the gray blazer. An entity that had every legal right to a controlling stake in a company Pruitt believed, In the part of himself he didn't examine too closely, that he had built. Nobody had ever told Pruitt he was wrong about that. Nobody had ever told him he was entirely right, either. He'd just lived in that gap for 6 years, and gaps like that have a way of turning into something harder over time. "Morning, everybody," Pruitt said, tapping the microphone once. "Thanks for making the time." The presentation started ordinary enough. Quarterly numbers. A slide about production efficiency gains on line 6. A joke about the parking lot repaving finally getting scheduled, which got the kind of tired laugh that jokes about parking lots always get. Then Pruitt moved into the part of the talk that had actually pulled 300 people into folding chairs on a Thursday morning. The rumors. Layoffs. Restructuring. A recapitalization plan that would bring in outside investment, streamline the org chart, position Hallbrook for the next decade, in Pruitt's words, delivered with the kind of practice calm that comes from saying a sentence in a mirror first. "I know there's been anxiety," Pruitt said. "I want to address that directly. Some roles at this company add tremendous value. Some roles, and I say this with respect, represent overhead we can no longer justify in a leaner operating model." A slide went up behind him. A pie chart. Categories of spending. One slice, unlabeled by department, but obvious enough in context, marked facilities and maintenance support functions. Pruitt's eyes moved across the room, scanning, the way a man scans when he already knows exactly where he's going to land and just wants it to look accidental. They landed on Marcus. "Take Marcus here," Pruitt said, and pointed not unkindly, not with any special malice in the gesture itself, just casual, the way a man points out a piece of furniture he's thinking about replacing. "Night maintenance. Good worker. Reliable. But I think it's worth asking, in a room like this, whether every role on this org chart is one this company actually needs going forward, or whether some of them are legacy positions we've simply never gotten around to reevaluating." A ripple went through the room. Not loud. Nothing so dramatic as gasps. Just a shift chairs creaking, eyes dropping to laps, the particular quiet of 300 people all deciding, independently and at the same moment, that this was not a fight worth having on a Thursday morning. Marcus sat very still. 2 rows up, a man named Curtis Boone, daytime engineering supervisor. Somebody Marcus had fixed a jam sensor for at 2 in the morning more than once, somebody who'd said, "Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver," on more than one of those occasions, looked back over his shoulder for half a second. Caught Marcus's eye. Looked away again just as fast, back toward the stage, back toward safety. Nobody said anything. A woman named Delia Frank, who worked front desk reception and had brought Marcus coffee more than once during an overnight equipment failure, glanced over too, then found something urgent to read on her phone. A younger guy from the engineering team, maybe 2 years out of college, looked like he might actually say something, half rose in his seat, even a couple inches, then caught the eye of his manager sitting beside him and settled back down instead, the moment passing before it ever really arrived. That's worth sitting with for a second. 300 people. A man who'd spent 6 years keeping their conveyor lines running at 2 in the morning, keeping their paychecks on time, keeping a building full of machinery from grinding to a halt every single night while they slept humiliated in front of all of them. And not one voice in that room rose up to say, "Wait a minute, that's not fair." Not because they were bad people. Most of them weren't. Delia liked Marcus. The kid from engineering probably would have said something in a smaller room, a quieter setting, one-on-one. It's just that speaking up costs something in a room like that, in front of 300 colleagues and a boss with the power to decide who still has a desk in 6 weeks. Most people, most of us, if we're honest, calculate that cost before we calculate the cost of staying quiet. It's not cowardice exactly. It's arithmetic. It just doesn't feel that way to the person sitting in the back row, doing the absorbing. Ask yourself, watching this, would you have been the one to stand up? Most people, if they're being honest with themselves, already know the answer, and it isn't always the one they'd like it to be. Naomi's hand had gone tight around the strap of her backpack. She didn't say anything either. Not because she agreed with the silence, because she was 19 and a guest in that room, and some part of her, the part that had grown up watching Marcus absorb things without flinching, was waiting to see what he'd do. Marcus didn't do anything. He shifted his weight slightly onto the cane, the way he did when the leg had had enough for one morning, and he let Pruitt keep talking because there wasn't a version of that moment where standing up and explaining himself would have done anybody any good. Pruitt didn't know what he was looking at. correcting him in front of 300 people on a stage, with a journalist's notebook open in the third row. That wasn't strategy. That was just pride, and pride wasn't something Marcus had much use for anymore. So he sat there, absorbed it, let it land. And afterward, when the town hall broke and folding chairs scraped back and people filed out toward the parking lot talking about the parking lot repaving and not about the man in the back row who'd just been called overhead in front of the whole company, Marcus found Elaine Kowalczyk by the coffee station near the doors. Neither one of them said anything about what had just happened. Elaine just looked at him, a long look, careful, the kind of look a lawyer gives a client when a lawyer already suspects where a situation is headed, and said one sentence. "Hold on to that. We're going to need it." Marcus didn't ask what it meant, not yet. He just nodded and drove home the long way, past the pothole by the grain elevator, and didn't say much to Naomi that evening either, though she noticed. She always noticed. That's the first loop. Hold on to it. We'll come back to it. Here's the part of the story that doesn't make for exciting television, but matters more than almost anything else in it. The 6 weeks that came after that town hall were quiet. Marcus kept working nights, kept fixing sensors, kept walking past executives who still did not nod. If anything changed in how people at Hallbrook treated him, it was subtle. A few more sideways glances, a few conversations that stopped a half second too abruptly when he walked into a break room. Word travels in a building of 900 people, even when nobody says much out loud. Marcus didn't complain, didn't file anything with HR, didn't post about it, didn't vent about it to the guys in the fantasy football group chat, though God knows they'd have had plenty to say if he had. He just kept doing the job, the way he'd been doing it for 6 years, because that's what the job required, and because there was a second thing happening underneath the surface that mattered a great deal more than one bad Thursday morning. There were other things happening during those 6 weeks, smaller things, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. Marcus kept his Sunday nights, kept the radios coming apart and going back together on the workbench, kept the mug in rotation, kept the coffee black, kept the routine steady even while everything around it had started to shift underneath his feet. Naomi noticed he was quieter than usual during that stretch, not withdrawn. Exactly, just more careful with his words, the way a man gets when he's holding something he hasn't decided how to say yet. The fantasy football group chat kept running too, oblivious as ever, one of the guys from the old unit sending a string of increasingly unhinged messages about a waiver wire pickup that was either going to save the whole season or ruin it, depending on which hour of the day you asked him. Marcus answered those messages the same as always. Some things didn't need to know what else was going on. At Hallbrook, the quiet stayed quiet. Marcus fixed a jammed sensor on line 4 at 2 in the morning, same as any other Tuesday. Fixed a control panel that had been throwing false errors since the weekend. Nodded at people who still didn't quite nod back. If any part of him wanted to walk into Pruitt's office and say something, settle it directly, get it over with, and there must have been a part of him that wanted exactly that, because he was human and humans want things settled. He didn't act on it. He'd learned patience the hard way, years earlier, in circumstances that had nothing to do with corporate politics and everything to do with staying alive, and patience wasn't a muscle that atrophied just because the stakes had changed shape. Elaine Kowalczyk had started asking questions. Not loud ones. Lawyer questions, the kind that get asked in emails with careful subject lines, in phone calls that last 11 minutes and cover exactly the ground they need to cover, and not 1 inch more. She'd noticed something in Pruitt's language at that town hall that most people in the room wouldn't have caught. Recapitalization wasn't just a word Pruitt was using loosely. He'd used it 3 separate times, always in the context of outside investment, always with a confidence that suggested a deal further along than anything the board had formally approved. Elaine represented Reedline Holdings' interest in Hallbrook Systems. Reedline held majority equity. Under the terms of the license agreement, Marcus had signed years earlier, the same agreement that had let him step back from the spotlight in the first place. Any sale of a controlling interest in Hallbrook required sign-off from Reedline's beneficial owner. Not a rubber stamp. Actual, documented consent. Elaine started making calls, reaching out to contacts on Hallbrook's board, requesting documentation on the recapitalization Pruitt had spoken about with such certainty. What she found, piece by piece, over the course of about a month, was this. Pruitt had been in advanced talks with an outside investment group, a firm looking to acquire a controlling tranche of Hallbrook Systems, and those talks had progressed considerably further than the board had been told. Term sheets had been drafted. A closing date had been floated, and nowhere in any of the paperwork Elaine could find was there a signature or even a formal notification from Reedline Holdings. Pruitt was trying to sell a controlling stake in a company he didn't have the right to sell, not without consent he'd never bothered to obtain, because some part of him, the part shaped by 6 years of resentment, had apparently decided that consent was a formality that could be handled after the fact, or ignored, or pressured into existence. That's the second loop. Keep that in mind, a deal that isn't supposed to exist yet, moving forward anyway. We'll come back to that too. Elaine called Marcus on a Tuesday evening, right around the time the garage door usually went up. "I need you to understand what I think is happening," she said. "And I need you to decide soon how visible you want to be when it comes apart." Marcus sat with that for a long moment, transistor radio half disassembled on the workbench in front of him, coffee going cold in the chipped mug. "It comes apart in public," he said finally. "Or it doesn't come apart at all." Elaine didn't argue. She'd expected that answer. Honestly, though she'd have understood if he'd chosen differently, plenty of people in Marcus's position would have taken the quiet route. A private legal letter, a settlement, a resolution nobody outside a boardroom ever heard about. But Marcus had sat in a folding chair and absorbed a public humiliation in front of 300 people. And something in him, not anger, exactly, something steadier and older than anger, had decided the correction needed to happen in the same room it started in. Another all-staff meeting got scheduled for 6 weeks out. Officially, it was billed as a recapitalization update, Pruitt's language on Pruitt's calendar, called specifically so he could announce what he believed by then was a done deal. Board approval pending, he told people privately, but pending in the way a man says pending when he means finished. Nobody at Holbrook knew what was coming. Elaine knew. Marcus knew. And that was for 6 weeks, the entire list. The second town hall happened on a Thursday again, same building, same folding chairs, same flags along the back wall. 300 people filed in the way they had 6 weeks earlier, except this time there was a different energy in the room. Word had gotten around that the recapitalization was close to official, and there's a particular kind of nervous quiet that settles over a room full of people who don't know if their job still exists in 3 months. Marcus took a seat in the back again, cane against the chair leg. Coffee mug, of all things, tucked into the outer pocket of a worn canvas bag he'd brought along, a small, deliberate choice, one nobody in that room would have registered as meaningful even if they'd looked directly at it. Naomi wasn't there this time. Her summer course had ended. But Marcus had told her, the night before, in the kind of understated way he told her most important things, that something was going to happen at work and that she should maybe check her phone around 10:30. Elaine sat near the front again, folder under her arm, posture as unreadable as ever. Pruitt walked out at 10:02, this time 2 minutes late instead of 4, which in hindsight meant nothing, but felt, to anyone tracking such details, like a man in a hurry to get somewhere. "Good morning," Pruitt said. "I'll get right to it. 6 weeks ago, I told you Holbrook was entering a new chapter. Today, I'm proud to say that chapter is here." He clicked to a slide, a logo for an investment firm nobody in the room recognized, alongside language about strategic partnership and operational excellence and a bold new future. The kind of slide built by a marketing department working from talking points, not facts. "This deal represents the culmination of years of work," Pruitt continued, and something in his voice had shifted from the calm of 6 weeks earlier into something with more edge to it, more heat, the sound of a man who'd been carrying a private frustration for a long time and had decided, on this particular morning, that he'd earned the right to let a little of it show. Years of building this company into something real, something that matters. And I'll be honest with you all, that work hasn't always been recognized the way it should be. His eyes moved across the room again, landed again on Marcus, sitting in the same back row, in the same gray polo, cane against the same folding chair. "Some of us built this company, Marcus." The room went still. "You just mop up after the people who did." 300 people. Nobody breathing. A few eyes dropped to laps again, the same reflex as 6 weeks earlier, the particular quiet of people deciding, once more, that this wasn't a fight worth having out loud. But this time, a chair scraped back. Elaine Kowalczyk stood up near the front row, folder in hand, and her voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room was already listening. "Mr. Pruitt, Before you continue, there's something the board needs to hear. Pruitt blinked. Elaine, this isn't the... It's exactly the time, Elaine said. You've just announced in front of this entire company and a member of the press that a sale of a controlling interest in Hallbrook Systems has been finalized. I'd like the room to understand that no such sale has been authorized. A murmur went through the folding chairs. The journalist in the third row had her pen moving fast now, head down, not looking up at all. Authorized by whom? Pruitt said, and there was still confidence in it, still the tone of a man who assumed he was one sentence away from making this go away. The board's been briefed. Not by the board, Elaine said. By Reedline Holdings, which, as you're aware, holds majority equity in this company, and whose consent is contractually required before any controlling interest can be sold. Consent that was never sought. Consent I have not given because my client was never informed these talks had progressed this far. Your client, Pruitt repeated, and something in his face was starting to shift, now not fear yet. Not quite. More like a man doing math he didn't want to do in front of an audience he very much didn't want watching him do it. Elaine, I've worked with Reedline for 6 years, and I have never once... You've worked with me, Elaine said. For 6 years. That was the arrangement. Marcus stood up. He didn't rush it. Reached down first, picked up the canvas bag, took the mug out of it, world's okayest fisherman, chipped along the rim, faded lettering, the same mug that had sat by the coffee pot every morning for 6 years, and set it down on the folding table at the end of his row. Slow. Careful. Like it mattered more than anything else in the room. Then he looked up at the stage. Go ahead, Elaine, he said. Elaine turned to face the room fully now. The majority beneficial owner of Reedline Holdings, the entity that holds controlling equity in Hallbrook Systems, the entity whose consent is required for any sale of this company, is Marcus Reed. Silence, for a moment, so complete it had a texture to it. Then Pruitt laughed, one short, disbelieving sound, the laugh of a man reaching for a joke because nothing else in his hands was working. That's Elaine. That's absurd. Marcus is a maintenance. Marcus and his brother Dennis founded the technology this entire company is built on, Elaine said. Dennis was the public face. Marcus held the patents. When Dennis died, Marcus stepped back from the spotlight and retained ownership through Reedline. He never sold his stake, Mr. Pruitt. He just never advertised it. Curtis Boone, 2 rows up, the man who'd looked away 6 weeks earlier, turned around fully in his chair this time. Stared. Didn't look away. Marcus didn't say much more than that. He wasn't a man built for speeches, and this wasn't a moment that needed one. He just stood there, cane in one hand, the other resting on the back of the folding chair in front of him, and let the room work through what it was hearing at its own pace. You said some of us built this company, Marcus said finally, quiet enough that the whole room leaned in to catch it. You're right about that. I did. My brother did. And I've watched you run it well some years. But you don't get to sell what isn't yours to sell. Not without asking. Not ever. Pruitt didn't have anything to say to that. For the first time in 6 years, in front of 300 people, Gregory Pruitt stood on a stage with nothing prepared. The journalist in the third row had stopped writing. She was just watching now like everybody else. What happened over the following weeks moved fast, the way these things tend to once the quiet part is over. The board convened an emergency session within 48 hours. Elaine presented documentation, the license agreement, the consent requirement, the timeline of Pruitt's undisclosed negotiations with the outside investment group. It didn't take long for the board to reach a conclusion nobody particularly enjoyed, but nobody seriously disputed either. Pruitt had attempted to broker the sale of a controlling interest in Hallbrook Systems without the legally required consent of the company's majority equity holder. A clear breach of fiduciary duty. Grounds for immediate termination, cause and all. Pruitt was gone within the week. No severance package worth mentioning, no soft landing, no graceful exit quote in a press release. Just gone, office cleared out on a Friday afternoon by 2 people from HR, while most of the building was still processing what had happened on that stage. The recapitalization deal Pruitt had staked his whole future on collapsed the same week it was supposed to close. The outside investment group backed out within 72 hours of hearing the words fiduciary breach An unauthorized sale. In the same sentence, nobody in that industry wants their name anywhere near a deal that starts with a lawsuit before it even finishes. Whatever Pruitt had been building toward for the better part of a year evaporated faster than the 6 weeks it had taken Elaine to piece together the truth in the first place. The journalist's story ran 9 days after the town hall, under a headline that didn't sensationalize so much as it simply stated what had occurred. Local automation firm's ownership structure revealed after CEO's failed sale attempt. It wasn't a tabloid pylon. It became something closer to a business ethics case study written up in a regional trade publication a few weeks later, cited in an MBA program's coursework the following year as an example of what happens when operational leadership forgets the difference between running a company and owning one. Pruitt didn't face criminal charges. The sale had never closed. No money had changed hands. No shareholders outside the company had been defrauded in any technical sense the law could reach. But word travels in an industry the way it travels in a town, and within 6 months, nobody serious was returning Gregory Pruitt's calls. Professionally, that was the whole sentence. Finished. Not with a bang. Just a door that quietly stopped opening. The board, in the weeks after, approached Marcus about stepping into the CEO role himself. Full spotlight. Full control. Formalized, official, his name on the door this time instead of buried in a holding company's paperwork. Marcus said no. He recommended a caretaker executive instead, somebody steady, somebody the board trusted, somebody who understood that the job was to run the company, not own the room. Marcus stayed on in an advisory capacity, which mostly meant showing up to a handful of meetings a year, and otherwise kept doing exactly what he'd been doing before any of this happened. Working nights, some weeks, when he wanted to. The badge still said the same thing. Months later, on a Sunday evening, the garage door went up in the same house on the same quiet street, and the same space heater kicked on against the early autumn chill. Marcus sat at the workbench. Coffee in the same chipped mug, world's okayest fisherman, still chipped, still faded, still the only mug that ever got used on a Sunday night. A transistor radio sat between his hands, half taken apart, the same slow ritual it had always been. Naomi was home for the weekend, back from her first semester of engineering school 2 states over, sitting on the same stool she'd claimed as hers years ago. She'd picked up the soldering iron without being asked, working on the frequency dial while Marcus talked her through it, not because she needed much guidance anymore, but because some habits don't need a reason to continue. Neither one of them mentioned Pruitt. Neither one mentioned the town hall, or the board, or the article that had run in the regional paper with Marcus's photograph above the fold. A photograph he still hadn't quite gotten used to seeing. None of that came up. It didn't need to. The radio caught a signal for the first time in months, a scratch of music coming through clean where there'd only been static before, some old song neither of them recognized right away, warm and a little tinny, filling up the garage. On the workbench, half in frame, sat a small trophy from the Fantasy Football League 3rd place this year, a fact Marcus would defend to his grave as a statistical anomaly, and next to it, a coaster nobody had asked for and nobody had explained. New, unchipped, the lettering still crisp. World's second okayest fisherman. Naomi never said where it came from. Marcus never asked. Some things get to stay quiet, not because they're hidden, just because they don't need saying out loud to be understood. Here's the question worth sitting with long after this story's over. How many rooms have you sat in a meeting, a classroom, a family dinner where somebody got underestimated right in front of you, and staying quiet felt like the safer move? Marcus Reed never asked anybody in that town hall to defend him. That was never really the point of the story. The point is that most of us, most days, are standing somewhere near the back of a room like that one, watching, deciding, calculating the cost of a single sentence we could say and usually don't. Maybe the story isn't really about a man who turned out to own the company all along. Maybe it's about the 300 people who looked away and the one lawyer who didn't. If this one landed for you, drop a comment and let us know which part hit hardest, the town hall, the reveal, or that coaster at the end. Share it with somebody who needs a reminder that quiet doesn't mean small. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. There's another one coming next week.